Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is Friday, and this is a wonderful turnout for San Mateo County. I could not be happier to be up here this morning to see all of you. I want to thank you for your support of both SAMCEDA, the San Mateo County Economic Development Association, and the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce. My name is Rosanne Foust, so I'm the CEO of SAMCEDA. We could not do events like this without all of you, and I just keep smiling because I see so many familiar faces that are consistently at the table when we discuss issues affecting San Mateo County. You all participate regularly, often. You're always there, and really from Amy Buckmaster, who is the CEO of the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber, she just walked through the doors in the back. We are so grateful that you support us and that you support chambers throughout San Mateo County. Georgette Naylor with the Burlingame Chamber is here this morning, so we're really appreciative of that. I'd like to do a few introductions because I think it's important to thank our elected officials. They put up with a lot. They put up with us as the business community. They put up with their constituents, and yet they also show up to the table. And so with us this morning, we actually have 3 former mayors, 2 from Redwood City, Jim Hartnett and Danny Gasparini. Thank you for being here. We have Ron Gonzalez, former mayor in the city of San Jose. And Ron does incredible work at the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, so hats off to him for all of that work. We also have Assemblymember Mark Berman. Thank you, Mark. Representing Assemblymember Kevin Mullen, Mario Rendon. We have our county controller, and he's going to have a little more money to handle with the passage of Measure W. So, Juan Ragoza. We also have Council Member Janet Borgens from the city of Redwood City. And are there any other electeds? I have been scanning the, Michael Brownrigg from the city of Burlingame. Thank you, Michael. We've been scanning the room, so we really feel it's important to acknowledge and to appreciate our elected officials. So please thank them when you have a moment. Again, our business community partners are what makes these programs happen, and our presenting sponsor this morning is Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, I don't know if any of you noticed the billboard when you drive into San Francisco and how it lists just locally what they do in the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars for local nonprofits. Wells Fargo gets out there with their people, with their financial resources, and this isn't just related to any legislation or regulations. This is because they want to be a community partner, and they have been our presenting sponsor at our Economic Outlook for a number of years. So thank you to Sunil from Wells Fargo. Thank you so much for being here, and your whole team. And you're going to hear from Mark Vitner later, who is fantastic. His bio is in the program. Please take a moment to read it. Mark was just published last week. There's a great real estate article that he wrote, and we're going to push that out to all of you because I think, considering the area that we live in, it'll be of interest. We also want to thank our corporate sponsors. I would like representatives from all of our corporate sponsors to stand up, which is one person from all of the different tables. Here are your corporate sponsors. Just take a moment and thank each other. I just want to take a moment, and I want you to look at that list, and I want you to think about the industries that are represented, from financial institutions to healthcare, to stage rigging, to Sims Metal Management, to Stanford, to Packard, to Oracle, to BKF, to DPR, to Recology, to Sims. I mean, to Bohannon, to Bill Butler and Butler Construction. I look at all of those and I say to myself, this is why we are so successful in San Mateo County. So again, patronize them, thank them, and think about how each of them affects our lives. Here are our program business and tech sponsors. From Perry, which is a Wonderman company, great success story, Carl McClellan and Heritage Bank, our business sponsors, and Kilroy and the Sobrato organization. Again, are you sensing the theme here with the diversity of sponsors that we have? And then Oracle. I mean, how did you all feel when you drove up this morning and you pulled along next to Design Tech High, fully funded by the Oracle Corporation? $22 million publicly chartered high school. Public. It is with the San Mateo and Sequoia Union High School districts. Pretty fantastic. So, without further ado, I am going to bring up Mark Vitner, and he's going to talk about the economy. Many of you have been here before and heard Mark. He's going to take it from the international to the national to California and the local level. Mark is going to do a presentation, then we're going to open it up to Q&A, then we're going to turn it up to the tone, tenor, and truth in online civic engagement. We've all been seeing what's happening in our local and our national politics, and so we have Marci Harris from POPVOX. Let's give a huge welcome to Mark Vitner.
Well, it's great to be back. It's an interesting time. This has been a very interesting week for the economy. I mean, we had the big speech that we were all waiting for all week. And I work on our trading floor and our main trading floor. And we were all kind of hoping that Powell was going to say pretty much what he said, but we weren't quite certain. And then, of course, we've got Saturday. And I'm a University of Georgia graduate. And we're playing the University of Alabama, and nobody gives us a chance. And I said, that's a big thing that has to go right for us this week. And then we've got Trump and Xi. And if Georgia can beat Alabama and Trump hugs it out with Xi, I'm going to be a really happy fella. I mean, that'll be just a home run for the week. But the Powell speech did mark something I think was pretty significant in that I think that views on the economy were beginning to shift a little bit. And I felt ever since the September meeting when they changed the policy statement where they said that they took the word accommodative out of their reference to monetary policy, so it was no longer accommodative. They took that out and they made it sound as if they were getting close to neutral in terms of the federal funds rate. And then in the press conference right after that, Jerome Powell said, well, I think we're a long way away from neutral. And then in the public statements by the Fed in the first week of October after the blackout period, they really blasted it out there. And I think that what the Fed was trying to do is really sell the bond markets on the case that interest rates were likely to rise. And I think they overdid it. And I've watched all the commentary that we've seen this week on CNBC because we have it on all the time, and I think that they're mostly right. I don't think that Powell acquiesced to Trump. I saw one that said Trump 1, Powell 0. I don't think that's it. I think that what happened is that we've got a new Fed chair, and the markets have not acclimated to his messaging. And Jerome Powell is the most plain-spoken Fed chair that we've ever had. He's not an economist by training, but it's not the first time that's happened either. But he's very plain-spoken. And I think he was too plain-spoken, and I think the markets over-interpreted what he said. The Fed has always been data-dependent. That's the big thing that people are thinking now is that they're now going to be focusing more on the data, and if the data don't support a bunch more interest rate hikes, they're not going to raise interest rates a bunch more times. And that really wasn't a change, but he's toned down the rhetoric, and was good enough for the markets. the data has looked a little bit softer in the fourth quarter, and we had very strong growth in the middle of the year. We had 4.2% GDP growth in the second quarter, 3.5% in the third. It looks like the fourth quarter is going to be around 2.5%, which is still pretty good, and for the year, we're likely to grow 3%. The most troubling thing that I see in the economy right now is that the most cyclical parts of the economy are all weakening at the same time. Motor vehicle sales have weakened, and simultaneously, General Motors and Ford have both announced big restructurings, which really have more to do with secular changes in the automotive industry than they do with the cyclical slowdown in the car sector. But I think that they correctly realize that the time to make those changes is when the economy is going relatively well, instead of waiting until we're in the midst of a recession. So I don't fault them with their timing on their decision. They may need to explain that a little bit more clearly, but we probably have seen the peak in auto sales for this cycle. Housing has been very weak, and it's been surprisingly weak in strong markets like here in California, which had been incredibly strong, and we've seen that home sales have weakened for the last few quarters. Nationally, we've been down for the last 6 months. And the most recent data on pending home sales that came out yesterday, and the NAHB Home Builders Index that came out the week before, indicate that sales are likely to slow further over the next couple of months. The factory orders data has also been weaker. And that's orders for big ticket capital equipment. And the other that bears watching is commercial construction, which still seems to be doing okay. But those four areas of the economy account for 20% of GDP. They're 20% of the pie, but they account for over 100% of the drop in GDP when we go into recession. Over 100% of the decline comes from those areas. So that's where all the swing is. And 3 out of the 4 are slowing, the others kind of in neutral. And that gives me some concern, and that should raise some concern at the Fed, and I think that's also partly in what in the Fed's messaging. In terms of our outlook, we're still looking for pretty good growth next year. Our overall number for 2019 is 2.7% growth. That looks really strong, but when you look at an annual average, it's the way the math works. The recession ended in the middle of 2009, and so the annual average really looks at the third and the fourth quarter of the previous year and the first and the second quarter of the current year. So when you look at 2018 with 3% growth, it really reflects the second half of 2017 and the first half of 2018. And so half of that annual average growth, that 2.7, is already in the books. Over the course of 2019, growth is likely to be closer to 2.3%, so on a fourth quarter to fourth quarter basis. So things are likely to get a little bit softer, and there's also some downside risk to the economy. And our early look at 2020 says that growth is probably going to be under 2%. I think we have 1.8% for 2020. But that's pretty good for an economy that will be expanding longer than any economic expansion that we've seen in the history of the country. Now, part of the improved economic environment this past year was due to fiscal policy. We had the tax cuts. And the tax cuts have put more money in consumers' pockets. We saw a big pickup in consumer spending in the third quarter, and holiday sales are off to a strong pace. And the biggest gains are actually occurring at the lower parts of the income spectrum. So that's where we're seeing the biggest improvement in consumer spending. We also had this bipartisan budget deal, which increased federal government spending, and we've seen an increase in defense outlays in particular. That's boosting growth, and that's likely to diminish over the course of 2019. So most of the biggest burst of activity that we're going to get from that is behind us. In terms of monetary policy, and I've covered this a little bit already, but we think the Fed will raise rates in December and then suggest that they may take a pause. They're not going to commit themselves. The way that the Federal Reserve is supposed to conduct monetary policy is they're supposed to go into every meeting with an open mind. They're not supposed to go into a meeting determined that they're going to raise rates, and much less that they're going to raise rates at this meeting and they're likely going to raise rates again at the next meeting. they really go in there more open-minded than that. And they're looking at a whole lot of data. There are representatives from all over the country that are at the meeting. And so I think that they're going to try to make the case that, hey, we don't have a preset course for higher interest rates here, although they are likely to go higher in the future. They just probably aren't going to go up as quickly as people had been expecting. The fourth point on the national outlook, and this one I wrote out very carefully, the Trump administration has opted for a more confrontational negotiating stance on international trade. You know, when I I did 3 or 4 years where I was economist for the Cal Chamber, and we were always very active with the Asian economic, the California Asian Economic Organization. I'm struggling for the name right here, but they would always be part of our meetings. And I remember when the Trans-Pacific Partnership was talked about, and we had all these representatives come in and talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the very next day in front of all the CEOs, they said, well, Mark, do you think it's going to happen? And I said, no, it's not going to happen. I said, it's politically, it's just not, it's not going to be there. And Trump's a little bit right but I don't want to say he's a whole lot right, but I do understand his opposition to these multilateral trade deals. Because when the United States agrees to a multilateral trade deal, our weight is not the same weight that it is in the global economy. We're the largest economy in the world. But when we agree to a multilateral trade deal, we are just one of 20 countries. We don't have any more weight than the smallest member in that group. And in a sense, in order to get that agreement, because we're the largest, we typically have to give up more to bring more people into the group than we wind up benefiting from it. Well, we've had this experiment. So we've seen where on the Trump's way is to go head-to-head, 1-to-1. And I'm not quite sure that you get a better result. So I understand the shortcomings in the multilateral deals, but I still think that working with other countries probably gets you a better result than the unilateral deals do. The renegotiation of NAFTA, I think, came off relatively well. What they wanted to accomplish with the renegotiation of NAFTA was to increase the proportion of products that are traded freely within North America, to increase the amount of North American content that's in those products. There will be an adjustment period to that. But the idea behind renegotiating NAFTA was to bring more of the supply chain back to the U.S. And there's still a lot of disagreement out there in policy-making circles, I guess, as to how successful that's going to be, because they think, well, gosh, can we bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? But when you look at what's the labor component, and the labor, that's where we were least competitive, is in products that had a very high labor component. But the labor component of virtually everything is dropping very, very rapidly. And so we can get more of that supply chain back. And there's a danger in losing the supply chain. When you lose the supply chain, you don't just lose the supply chain to what you're producing today. You lose the supply chain to whatever's going to be produced in the future, and so you lose all of those industries of the future. And we've learned that the hard way. Now, looking locally, as everyone in this room probably knows, we have the lowest unemployment rate in California. The Bay Area has the lowest unemployment rate of any major metropolitan area in the country at 2.2. I think we're at 2.1. We've got to best the Bay Area a little bit, I guess, but we're at 2.1. But the high cost and the lack of, I don't know what affordable housing is here. Anything under $1.5 million? I don't know. But the lack of housing options has caused population growth to slow, and we have seen that population growth has slowed. One of the things that we've seen in California and in other higher tax states is that housing has slowed more than it has nationally. So we are seeing some negative impacts from tax reform. And we knew that we probably would. We didn't know how quickly they would show up. On the flip side of that, areas that tend to attract, low tax areas that tend to attract a lot of retirees, like Arizona and Nevada, are growing stronger today than any time in this economic expansion. So they've become leaders. The same is true of Florida. Florida's also seen a huge influx, although not as many Californians going all the way across to Florida. I'm going to go over some of the charts real quick, and then we'll open it up for questions. But that's kind of the quick overview. And you don't have to read the numbers on here. I realize they're very, very small, but but the chart on your left is our GDP forecast through 2020, and it probably won't be that steady. It won't be that predictable. But over the course between now and the end of 2020, I think that we'll see that the economy gradually loses momentum. And the reason why is we're running out of people. The unemployment rate's at 3.7%. If we can boost productivity growth, and I'm optimistic that we can, maybe we can grow a little bit faster than that, but we're not going to grow a whole lot faster than that. Capital spending is also slowing. Part of that is just to where we are in the business cycle. Corporate profits are still pretty good. Big part of that, though, is energy, and that most of the capital spending increase that we've seen in this cycle has been tied to energy. There are a lot of very large oil pipeline projects that are in the works. The United States produces about 11 million barrels of oil a day. We could produce probably 13 or 14, but there's no pipeline capacity to bring it to refineries or storage facilities. There's a little over 2 million barrels a day of pipeline capacity that will open in the next 12 to 15 months. So it's largely in there. But a lot of that steel, a lot of the stuff that's going into that's already been ordered. It's in the process of being produced or is being assembled. In terms of job growth, the numbers have been real strong. We get a big employment report. Wait a minute, did we get the employment report this morning, or is it next week? But we get the employment group numbers have been real strong. We get it next Friday, and we're expecting, I think, 200,000 net new jobs to be added in the month of November. That number's a little bit of a wild card, though. I mean, the unemployment claims numbers have been trending up. We Yeah, I was looking for that, but that's. And I got up and I walked over here from my hotel. It was a challenging walk this morning, but 200,000 jobs is a good number of jobs. We only need to add 80,000 jobs a month to keep the unemployment rate steady. And so if we're adding 200,000 jobs a month, I don't know if the unemployment rate will fall. Thank you. I don't know if the unemployment rate will fall from its current level, but if we add 200,000 jobs a month for 2 or 3 months, the unemployment rate's going to fall further. It's kind of amazing that we're adding this many jobs. You look on the right; those are job openings. We have more job openings in the country. We have 1.1 jobs available for every unemployed person in the workforce today. So there is a bit of a skills mismatch. We're not seeing people move as much for jobs as they did previously. We don't see as much labor market mobility, and I think part of that is where we are in the cycle, and that we've got a lot of baby boomers. The youngest baby boomer turned 54 this year, and I think many of those baby boomers, they've got kids that went to college at a time where they were probably stressed financially, so maybe they borrowed a little bit more than they would have liked. They graduated into a weak job market, and maybe they came back home and lived with their folks for a while. And the baby boomers are now looking at retirement. They look at their 401ks and look at their savings and say, gosh, I'm not quite sure it's going to work. And the one thing that they've done is they've refinanced their mortgage to a 15-year fixed at 3.5%, and they're building a boatload of equity. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing as much wage pressure in the economy, because everybody focuses on the millennials, but there are just as many boomers as they are millennials. And there's this big bunch of people out there that are saying, you know what, I'm sitting tight, I'm riding it out. I'm not going to jump ship for a few extra dollars, because right now my housing costs are very, very low. And I'm going to show you a chart that shows you how big a factor that is right now, because the amount of equity that people have in their homes is at an all-time high. There was an article out last week that said that people were borrowing money, that they were using their homes as ATMs again. It was not true. It was fake news. It was You know, it was, yeah, you know, it's one of those things. I mean, one of the things about fake news is that, or when these things are, there's a little bit of truth to it, but there's more untruth than truth to it. And what happened, that's a good number to look at. Refis are practically at an all-time low. If you're going to refi a mortgage today, odds are you're doing it so you can take cash out of your house, because you wouldn't do it to get a lower mortgage rate, because mortgage rates are higher than they've been for the last several years. So a higher proportion, while refis, the absolute number and volume of refis is at an all-time low, the proportion of people doing it and taking cash out of their home is higher than it was since the peak of the housing boom. But in dollars, it's less than 1/6 of what it was at that time. So even though the economy is much larger. So anyway, that's sidetracked there. Looking at the unemployment rate, 3.7%. There's no doubt that it's tight. This is nationally. I do suspect that the unemployment rate today is not comparable with the unemployment rate that we saw previously. We measure it the same way. The way that unemployment is measured is there's a survey that's done by the Census Bureau every month under contract from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they call a relatively small number but a statistically significant sample of households, and they say, did you work within the last 30 days for pay or for profit for at least 1 hour? And if you said yes, you're counted as employed. If you said no, they said, did you look for work within the last 30 days? And if you said yes and you didn't work, then you'd be counted as unemployed, and they divide that into the sum of the two of those, and you get the unemployment rate. What's changed today is that in past business cycles, if you were unemployed, chances are looking for a job was your full-time job. I mean, you spent all day looking for a job. Today, with LinkedIn and Career Builder, and the jobs are looking for you, and you can do that at night. You can work. So I think many more unemployed people are showing up as employed in the employment statistics. And so I think there's a little bit more slack, and I think this helps explain why we haven't seen the typical wage pressures that we had seen when the unemployment rate had dropped below what was known as full employment. And there's no question that we're getting there. And it also helps explain why we have all these job openings. What I think is happening is I think that in the labor market today, if you look at where the biggest wage gains are, they're mainly in the lowest paying sectors. So they're in the retail trade area. You've seen that Walmart and Target have both boosted the minimum wages that they're willing to pay all over the country. And the same thing's happening at hotels and restaurants. I think a lot of people were landing, they had taken a job in those industries and were looking for something more permanent, but now those things that are more permanent and more tied to what their professional goals are opening up. They're coming out of those jobs. It doesn't show up as wage pressure because they're landing an initial job, but where the wage pressure is showing up is in the areas that they're leaving, which are retailing in the leisure and hospitality sector. It's a little different view, but that's kind of my specialty, is to kind of look at things and try to figure out what we're missing out there. In terms of inflation, the overall rate of inflation is around 2%. Goods prices have been flat for the last several years. Services prices are rising around 3%. I had mentioned the federal funds rate already. Long-term interest rates have come down with the Fed's recent comments a little bit, and so mortgage rates may back off a little bit. We may get a little pickup in mortgage activity. But in terms of long-term rates, a lot of people were worried when they were climbing that they were going to go up much, much faster. They're somewhat limited by rates overseas, particularly in Europe. And so, you know, our rates, the German rates, our rates are not going to go up that much faster than rates overseas, and the recovery overseas has been lacking. Consumer confidence is nearing the all-time high that it hit back in the 1990s. The Consumer Confidence Index, this is the number that came out this week, more closely resembles labor market conditions in the economy as opposed to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, which asked a lot of questions about consumer finances. It weakened because of the sell-off in the stock market. They both cover the same general period of time, but the labor market has not weakened at all. The labor market hasn't shown any of the volatility that the stock market has. Small business confidence also at an all-time high. This is our own survey. And our own survey differs a little bit from the NFIB in that we look at companies with $0 to $4 million a year in revenues. The NFIB goes up to $200 million in revenues, but both of them are at all-time highs, and businesses seem to be pleased with tax reform, which was more geared toward them. Oil prices down to $50 a barrel, increased supply here in the U.S., increased supply in Saudi Arabia. This is a chart on light vehicle sales, and it's not cratering, but as you can see, we hit the all-time high for car sales in this cycle was a couple of years ago. And I don't think we're going to get back to those levels. In fact, one of the things that I worry about with car sales is that tax reform was a little sneaky in that they didn't only lower the marginal tax rates, they also changed the withholding schedules. And so they said, we want people to get smaller tax refunds. The government shouldn't be holding on to that money. Well, now it's a year into it. We are going to have smaller tax refunds. And folks in high tax states, we may see that we get tax bills. And I think that could really hit car sales. Now, as our forecast for home sales going forward, I want to show you this one chart, then I'm going to get to the local real quick. And that is if you look at the chart on the right, this is the rise in home equity, the amount of equity people have in their homes, and you can see how it's the largest it's ever been. And we've also had much less housing turnover. Let me fast forward here and show you what's going on regionally, and then we'll stop for some Q&A, and that is, I see my 5 minutes there, so or maybe I'm past 5 minutes. 2 minutes? All right, well, I got to wrap up real quick then. Let me wrap up real quick. In terms of GDP growth, California grew 3.7 during the second quarter. We've outgrown the nation every year for the last 5 years. Job growth in California has been incredibly strong. Its strongest is in San Jose. San Francisco's at 2%. The nation's at 1.7%. When you get the bigger the metropolitan area is, the harder it is to outperform the nation consistently. You look at where unemployment is the lowest, it's along the coast, highest in the interior, although it's come down considerably in the interior. Kind of give you an idea of job growth, we're right around 2%, and wages in California are up 4.6%. Looking at the unemployment rate, as I mentioned, 2.1%. They've been trending down in the state. California's unemployment rate is actually lower at any time that we've had since we've been tracking California's unemployment rate. Let me just get to what's happening here with housing in the MSA. We have seen a big pickup in apartment construction, and we've actually seen some lessening in the rent pressures on apartments. But population growth in the Bay Area has slowed in a pretty significant way, mainly because of the run-up in housing costs and some of the congestion issues. And some of it also has to do, well, let me show you. This is California's GDP, which is the light blue, versus the U.S., which is the black. But some of the growth in the Bay Area has definitely been driven by the tech sector, and this is tech employment, and you can see the height of the dot-com bubble back then in the late 1990s and how much higher than we are today. And when you look at what's going on in the tech sector, it looks very, very positive. This is the San Francisco Fed's Tech Pulse Index, which does a very good job of capturing the growth in demand for tech services. It's probably still too heavily weighted toward goods, which has not been where most of the growth is. The big worry, though, is in this weakness in the NASDAQ recently and some of the weakness of the sell-off in some of the tech stocks. And I don't think there's any doubt that social media companies are going to be facing increased regulatory scrutiny for the foreseeable future. And also big tech companies. And Google and Amazon are going to face increased scrutiny for the foreseeable future. And when you increase regulation, growth in that industry is going to slow. The other thing that's happening within the tech sector is that it's broadening across more of the country. Stanford's the head of economic development was hired away by Georgia Tech, and lo and behold, Tech Square has become very rapidly one of the fastest growing tech sectors in the country. So let me stop there. There's a lot more data in here, but I could go on all day, and I don't think you could listen all day. So let me, how much time do you think for questions? 2 minutes? Oh, okay. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for some questions. Come on, we saved 10 minutes for questions. So. And if you haven't seen it, I also write about college football. So.
On the question of the unemployment and the skill gap you mentioned, my understanding is that in California we have quite a high dropout rate from the public high schools. So I'm wondering if some student drops out of high school at age 16, does he go on the unemployment? And secondly, do you think that one of our issues is we don't have a viable vocational training for people in that situation to give them an opportunity to get employment?
Yeah, those are two really good questions. In terms of whether they become unemployed, and in terms of collecting unemployment benefits, you can only collect unemployment benefits if you were working and lost a job. So first you have to be working. So if you've never had a job, you can't go on and collect unemployment benefits. But you would only be counted as unemployed, and being counted as unemployed isn't the same thing as receiving benefits. You would only be counted as unemployed if you were looking for a job and didn't have one. So that certainly could happen with a 16-year-old. But it is a good point that when people drop out of school, there's not a whole lot of opportunities for them. And I got to tell you, it's typically young men, and it's not just high school; it's also college. One of the issues facing the housing sector, and it always gets a good chuckle when I tell people this, is that women, millennial women, women aged 25 to 34, 46% of them have graduated from college, but only 36% of the millennial men have graduated from college. And a woman college graduate, she doesn't want to marry a guy that's dropped out of college and's got a lot of student loan debt and wants to sit on the couch and play video games all day. That's not going to happen. And it is, and so the median age of a first marriage has gone up about 8 years. And what would be the ideal situation is that and I still don't know if it would fix the marriage question, but when these folks drive out of college, we've got a shortage of construction workers. We have no more construction workers in the United States today than we did at the end of the recession, at the bottom of the recession. We have the same number of people working in construction. And the average age of a construction worker, or the median age, is pretty old. So it's over 50, or right around 50. And so there's lots of opportunities there. And I think that there's a lot of people that drop out of college or drop out of high school and they really don't know what their prospects are. And I don't think it's just the vocational school. I think it is making people aware of what opportunities are out there. And I don't have all the answers on that, but I think that's the big problem is once you get people that are aware of what those opportunities are, then you have to make them aware of how they can take advantage of it. Because California does have a lot of vocational training programs. We've got a multitude of them. It may seem overwhelming to somebody who's trying to figure out what they want to do at that point in their life. Yes.
I love paying lower taxes as much as the next person, but at what point do you think the increased government spending combined with the lower tax revenues at the federal level will impact economic growth?
Well, right now, we have this humongous deficit, and I think every quarter point that rates go up costs us $52 billion more. So what raises our debt service cost by $52 billion. I mean, that's $52 billion's a lot. It's and the deficit. It's we're about $20 trillion debt, and we're gonna have about $1 trillion budget deficit this year. It's very problematic. Now the thinking, and this is not. I'm just presenting the case for tax reform as it was made. Was that our potential growth rate in the economy is the sum of productivity growth, which has averaged 0.7%, 0.7%, and labor force growth, which has averaged 0.6%. So our potential GDP growth from 2010 through 2017, and I really through 16, I don't think we've got the 17 numbers to match this up, was 1.3%. The economy grew 2% and on average during that time period, and so the unemployment rate fell from 10 to 4.5. Well, if we could only grow 1.3% a year, now that we're at full employment, if that's as fast as we can grow, then we're never going to solve the deficit, whatever it was. The thinking on tax reform, and this was explained to me by Mick Mulvaney, who I knew before he went up to become the budget director. He said, you know, what we have to do is we have to boost the economy's potential growth rate. If we reduce marginal tax rates, and the biggest reduction was done at the lowest level, that's where there was a 3-point reduction, then maybe we entice 1 or 2/10 more labor force growth. We also may encourage older folks, baby boomers that are leaving the workforce, to stick around for a little while, which gives us a double whammy because they're our most experienced workers, and it boosts productivity growth. So if we can go from that 0.6 to 0.7 or 0.8, I would say 0.7 on labor force growth, and then boost capital spending where they have the expensing for capital outlays so that we get productivity growth back up to 1.5 or 2%, then we can get potential GDP growth 2.5. Now, Trump will say 3 or 4. I can't see how you can make it work that way, but that's the objective behind tax reform. I would say that the early returns are encouraging. Last year at this time, we were expecting the economy to add an average of 160,000 jobs a month in 2018. We've added an average of 209. So somehow, even with a lower unemployment rate and with businesses having increased difficulty finding workers, we've had stronger job growth. And so I think that we are seeing some benefit there. On the second matter, I think that the potential benefit to business fixed investment from tax reform was totally offset by all the uncertainty on trade. And I think a lot of businesses have held back. So I don't know that we're going to get that boost to productivity growth that I was hoping for. But productivity growth is also improving. This year it's up 1.3 instead of 0.7. So potential growth is closer to 2%. Still a lower unemployment rate because we grew faster than that. The potential growth is closer to 2. So that's the thinking on tax reform. You know, whether or not it's going to pay for itself over 10 years, I think that's probably too much to ask. I don't think it's going to do that. I think we'll probably see some other reform, and they're going to have to come up with some ways to generate revenues. We're probably also going to have to do entitlement reform, which means we're going to have to reform Social Security in a way that raises the retirement age for people younger than me. So it's
I wish we had more time, but let's give a warm round. So I'd also like to acknowledge State Senator Jerry Hill, who joined us this morning. Thank you for being here, Senator Hill. Now I'm going to bring up Marci Harris, who is the co-founder and CEO of POPVOX. Marci is going to touch on tone, tenor, and truth in online civic engagement, and then we're going to have a conversation. Welcome, Marci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as Rosanne said, I'm going to touch on tone, tenor, and truth. I'm going to tell you that we haven't solved it, but that we think it's a good question to be asked. Let's see. Here we go. Number one, thank you, Rosanne and Amy and others for inviting me to be here. I'm going to tell you a bit about POPVOX, which is this company that I co-founded with 2 other folks back in 2010, and tell you our journey and where we're going next, which is to the local level in 2019. So in 2011, we started with a simple idea. I was a congressional staffer, very frustrated with the way that information flowed into Congress. Very difficult to know if we were hearing from real people, very difficult to manage the signal-to-noise ratio. So we thought, okay, what if we brought all the bills online so that the public could see what Congress was working on, required constituents to come in and register with a real name, delivered their input to Congress in a way that could be easily processed, and made the whole process transparent. And we'll call it POPVOX, after Vox Populi, voice of the people. So we did that, and we solved the technical problem that we had set out to solve, but we didn't fix Congress. In fact, we found a few unintended consequences and some waves that were already coming and crashing on the shore. We saw advocacy groups that were incentivized to drive clicks as the tone and the tenor of online engagement continued to grow ever more polarized, partisan, and to the hyperbolic. The 24/7 news cycle creates strong constituencies on the edges and not so much incentive for compromise or for working together. And that, in turn, incentivizes lawmakers to play to the cameras. We were in an environment where things were getting worse, and we weren't fixing it. So we decided to work with these advocacy groups. We launched widgets in 2012 to help them use our platform to send their constituents to contact Congress. We at least thought that this would give greater transparency to what Congress was hearing, and we would actually be able to show that there were real people behind these advocacy campaigns, but not all the campaigns wanted transparency. And we were not really big enough in this large ocean of activity to actually have the input. So in 2014, we overhauled the whole code base. We raised a Series A. We brought the platform to the state level. Thank you, Reid Hoffman and Tim O'Reilly, for supporting that. And we began to customize the individual's experience on the platform. And we started doing outreach to the public. Our goal was, let's help people pay attention, know what's going on, and understand how the process works. And then something happened. In 2016, the election completely changed the dynamic. For those of us who'd been working in the civic engagement space, our challenge was no longer how do we get people to pay attention. It was so many people are paying attention, and there's absolutely massive influx now. And for us, we've always worked in a very nonpartisan and neutral way, the public tone was just a little bit fierier than we could keep up with. So the way that we were talking to folks, which was the legislative process works like this, and this bill has been introduced, and so co-sponsored, was not at all the way the public was ready to receive information from 2016 on. And there were wonderful groups popping up and organizations that could talk to them at their level. So for us, we decided we're going to move away from reaching out to the public, and we're going to work on infrastructure. So over the past couple of years, that's what we've been doing. We started to take on the way that advocacy organizations and others were delivering messages into Congress. Believe it or not, a lot were going via fax. As a former staffer, it still hurts me to think about that. So we made our electronic delivery system available for others to use via API. We also have been working on a series of tools for legislative staffers at the federal level called LegDash that will be available to the new Congress when they come back in January of 2019. We have a new app for new members of Congress that is going to be available today to help them connect with former members and have mentoring and connect with each other. But the two big pieces that we've been working on that we will unveil next year get to what Rosanne mentioned, the expansion of POPVOX to the local level and the opening of a network that allows constituents to connect with their lawmakers. So our question in this move is, can we, by building a network specifically focused on local, so specifically to connect constituents to their local lawmakers, improve the tone, truth, and trust of online civic engagement? I think we've all heard there have been some issues on that lately. And a lot of questions about what brings that about, and a lot of questions about how to solve that, and some of the platforms where some of the problems occurred are working very hard to figure out how to address it. Our approach will be in providing tools for local officials to better manage some updates to constituents. What we're calling a glass wall network, and what I mean by that is that it will be transparent to everyone, but only constituents can interact with the lawmakers. So it begins to address the problem that you might hear from the entire internet rather than just the people who are living in your district. And prioritizing the constituents' control of their data so that you get to decide how you receive notifications, not an algorithm that someone else is working on to try to get you to click. So the use cases that we're trying to address are pretty familiar. Certainly for public officials or anybody who attends regular meetings, sometimes it's tough to hear from the people who perhaps have some input but are a little too busy to show up. And so the folks who end up showing up frequently are the ones who are almost against or very personally interested in the issue. We've talked to county commissions around the country who said we don't have a good way of notifying constituents about what's going on. For individuals, I've experienced this myself. When you move from one place to another, it's very difficult to figure out, okay, I want to be an informed citizen. I want to hear from my local officials. It's really hard sometimes to even figure out what that system looks like and where I should go sign up to get updates from my supervisor, updates from my city council person, et cetera. So giving a new resident an opportunity to just go in one place, change their address, and start to receive notifications and updates from their local officials in their new district or state. But we are a civic startup. So the way that we work is by trying to really address these civic questions. That's our reason for existing. So in this new endeavor, the tone, truth, and trust question is really how we'll be measuring success. And some of the detailed questions that we get into with that, we'll be working with New Policy Lab at Berkeley to measure, and with the Georgetown Beck Center in Washington. But we'll be asking some key questions and benchmarking with current engagement to future engagement. Does the rollout of a local platform and the ability to connect with lawmakers in a different way increase awareness and understanding of local issues? Does it increase the number and diversity of participants engaging on local issues? Does it improve resident satisfaction with interactions with officials? And does it increase awareness of who represents me and how local government works? Because I'm sure you all know absolutely everyone who represents you and how it all works from the vertical jurisdictions on up to the national level, but that is not the norm. It's really difficult. And so these are the questions and the problems we're trying to address. It's a pilot. It'll be a pilot next year. We won't know until we try if we're actually able to move the needle on those questions, but those are our goals. So this is our rollout. Right now, we're signing up pilot jurisdictions for some of the elected officials in the room. I would really like to talk to you, or I may have already talked to you. And we'll be in development in the first couple of quarters next year, and sitting down not just with local officials, we'll be sitting down with the constituents and with the community organizations to understand how the new platform's being received. These are just mock-ups. These are some of the local officials appear here, but you can see basically it's the setup is just a place where you would see constantly all of the people who represent you, and there are various updates and posts, which include the ability for them to ask a question of, what are your feelings on this or that issue, but only constituents can reply. Again, anyone can view, the media, people from other areas, supporters around the country, critics from around the country can view, but only constituents can engage. And the constituent can set their preferences for how they want to hear from the lawmakers. So instead of wondering if you post something into a platform that presents information by algorithm, the constituent, him or herself, is able to say, I would like to get emails from Assemblyman Berman, and I would like to receive text notifications from Senator Hill, and I would like to receive just a dashboard notification from my city council person. The information that will be displayed on the platform is pretty basic. Of course, you can imagine the challenge of getting this into a platform from lots of different jurisdictions around the country is not a simple one, but the ambition is actually quite simple. A very standardized list of local officials and who represents me, the district boundaries, meeting times, and local announcements. And then on the civic side, the ability to provide input on pending legislation or initiatives. It depends on the jurisdiction whether those can be received as official public comments or if they're really just for information, for the lawmakers' information. Updates from representatives, custom notifications, and really giving, again, that one-stop shop for getting information about issues at all levels. So we still believe that technology can help us be better informed, more connected, and make government work for everyone. It just takes a different approach than what we've seen in a lot of cases. So again, we don't accept ads to make sure that there's no incentive to drive clicks. That works, certainly, in lots of areas, but in your civic life, some of the information that you need to receive is a little bit boring, sorry to say, but you still need to receive it. And that's okay. Just getting the information presented to you is a net good in itself, even if you're not clicking and sharing and spreading it all around. We don't sell or share user data. Again, that's a great model in some other areas of your life. But in this specific context, which is not electoral, it is legislative and for governing, that's not our model. We're obsessively nonpartisan. And again, we prioritize the civic mission over profit, and we work with funders that do that. So it's still a simple idea. Building technology for civic engagement and good governing that doesn't compromise the civic mission, and we're hoping to start doing that in 2019 in San Mateo County. So thank you. Sure? Where do you want me?
So we're going to open it up to Q&A shortly, but Marci and I met earlier this week, and I could not be more excited about what she is doing because I have been following POPVOX since their inception. So I believe we met in probably 2012, if not 2011. And one of my questions for her, because if you noticed on the last slide, she was very, very clear about this tool and this platform is not being set up for any type of exit strategy. So I want her to talk a little bit more about that because I think that's a point that really needs to be driven home, especially because I know that there's a number of jurisdictions in the audience that I definitely want to encourage to sign on for the initial test pilot. So tell us, or tell the audience what you shared with me about the no exit strategy.
Sure. So we're a weird hybrid. We are set up as a for-profit company, but we are a mission-driven for-profit company, and that has been a part of our model since its inception. It's the reason that we haven't taken certain types of funding that, you know, a typical VC funding of a startup is set up so that the VC makes their money back with an exit or going public at a certain point. We instead have taken philanthropic equity investment, and we've also taken philanthropic funding for nonprofit, separate public benefit projects. So for example, the legislative dashboard or the app for new members of Congress was funded by the Democracy Fund as a nonprofit project. So our reason to be is our reason for revenue model is to continue to exist. And as I told Rosanne, you know, when we were getting started, we were looking for a model that would work for getting this to exist in the world. We would have been a nonprofit if there had been a viable model for that back in 2010. I can say with pretty good confidence that if we had gone the nonprofit route, we probably wouldn't be around now, because there's a requirement to continue going back to your funders as a nonprofit and explaining how you did what you said you were going to do. And as you saw, we're not doing what we said we were going to do in 2010. We didn't know what we were going to need to do back then. And so having the agility of being a startup and the ability to learn and kind of go where there's demand or go where we see opportunity has been really important for continuing to exist. But the important thing is that the funders that we work with also share our desire to continue to exist, but not to be a 100x exit for them.
So, and tell us what your first conversations were with Reid Hoffman and with Tim O'Reilly, because those two folks, I mean, Reid Hoffman is known in the Valley, philanthropic, Tim O'Reilly, O'Reilly Media, and everything that he is doing with Code for America, and his partner, Jennifer Palka.
Yeah.
Yes, that name always escapes me. So tell the audience what they said when you approached them.
So Tim was one of our first conversations. I was still a congressional staffer with this idea kind of bothering everyone I ran into with the thought that we should do this. And there was really no way to do it within Congress. I kept taking it around to try to see if Congress could build it. And I found out there was no Congress. There were many offices within Congress. And if you wanted to build one for House Democrats, you could do that. Or Senate Republicans, you could do that. But there was no infrastructure for building for Congress. And this was about the same time that Tim O'Reilly, I think it was back in 2007 or 8, was going to DC to try to connect entrepreneurs and technologists with the government and get the government excited about working with Silicon Valley. It was kind of one of those first ambassadorial missions. And he came and met with this group of staffers, and we were a motley crew of like systems administrators and social media managers. I was one of the only policy people who had kind of found this tribe of people who cared about technology and thought that it could be used to improve the way that Congress functions. And so we met in a dark conference room, I think in the Longworth building, and Tim showed up, and it's one of those things that, he's not famous in Washington, or he wasn't. It was like, okay, nice to meet you. Who are you? What do you do? And he, at the time, had ideas about how lawmakers could open up and better communicate with their constituents, but it was through, the fairly new platform at that time, Twitter and Facebook. And I said, yes, but they don't want to communicate. They don't know if those are their constituents. That's how is that value? Oh, he wanted staffers to tweet, and I was like, oh God, you don't want staffers to tweet. That's like the worst thing. If a staffer, like, what if they got picked up and it was in the newspaper? Oh, that was a nightmare. And so we started kind of riffing on the dynamics and the different experience that you have in DC dynamics versus Silicon Valley. And I said, but I've got this idea. And so I sent it out to him, and he was so kind and looked over it and said, okay, well, when you decide to do this, give me a call. And about 6 months later, I moved to Silicon Valley, and I said, I'm here. So went and talked to him, and he became our earliest angel investor advisor, and now is on our board. And he facilitated the introduction to Reid in 2015, and I'll be very honest, I think that introduction is what kind of smoothed the way. But Reid he had started a philanthropic fund that was investing in various civic endeavors. I think you can read about some of his work investing in Change.org and CrowdPack and a few other projects. I think in a very Silicon Valley kind of way, what would happen if I put some money in this area? Could these people who say they've got ideas actually make this happen? And Code for America, for sure, was paving the way, I think, for folks in technology to understand both the need and the opportunity and the responsibility to step up and actually begin to work on improving governance.
That's fascinating. And I think, sort of to tie this all together, we have probably about 3/4 business people here, 20% electeds, we have nonprofits. And so to sort of bring it full circle, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, I'm thinking about, and I asked you this when we met earlier, why is this so important to the business community, and why should they be paying attention to this type of platform? because there's a couple of messages. I
You're
know.
ringing my bell. So I'm originally from Tennessee. I moved to Silicon Valley in 2010, as I mentioned, via Washington. And I love Silicon Valley. I'm so inspired by Silicon Valley. It's very exciting. I remember when I first moved out here just saying everyone's so open and everyone has an idea and there's a meeting happening at every table in the Starbucks and the barista's got a business plan that she's pitching, and there's just so many, like everybody's doing something here and they think so big. It's wonderful. But there is also the side of Silicon Valley that we also understand that if this is the future that these companies are trying to build, right now, this Bay Area has not figured out how to make that future work for everyone. And I know a lot of people in this room are trying to figure that out, but the rest of the world is watching, and we got to figure it out. And so how constituents engage with their government, and do they feel respected and a part and informed and a part of it, and is there a way for a broad group of constituents to engage with their government, not just the usual suspects? Is there transparency? Is there accountability? That's one of those questions that I think falls into the category of Silicon Valley needs to be thinking about that too, because it is a big question, not just for this area, not just for this country, but for the world. And we've not gotten it right over the past few years.
We have work to do. So there's a lot of bright people in this audience. Let's have some questions for Marci. Michael Brownrigg, who is a council member, former mayor in the city of Burlingame.
Hi, thank you for the...
Michael. We'd like you to use the microphone because this is being filmed for Peninsula Television, Penn TV, and we'll be showing it on the station.
Thank you very much for POPVOX. So speaking probably for just about every elected official, if you could take the dialogue with residents off of Nextdoor and into your channel, I think we'd all be grateful. I actually am curious if you think you can do that, because Nextdoor is popular in part because you can figure out where the barbecue set is and how to get rid of your, But I have a different question. It's a little wonky, but especially for a council where you have 5 equal voices, how do you recommend that people talk to constituents? Because we don't always see eye to eye, and you've got to avoid having a dialogue with council members because of the Brown Act.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and that's really why we're treating 2019 as a pilot year, so that we'll be sitting down and talking not just with the lawmakers, but also with the council to figure out how to navigate some of these questions. In some ways, the existing social media platforms have paved the way for what is possible. It then becomes a question of, okay, if that's legally possible, is it also desirable, and is it working? So one of the reasons that we're so excited to work with the folks at Berkeley and the folks at Georgetown is to have a bit of a sentry for, we have these wonderful ideas of what we're going to roll out and all the ways we think it's going to help. Is that happening? So, if we get to a point where it's like, oh, this is breaking democracy, but lots of people are engaging. What should we do? No, we don't want to break democracy. And so we'll be looking to work with you and kind of hear how are things working? Is this improving? Again, is this improving the tone? Is this improving the trust? Is it improving? Those are our metrics to figure out if what we're rolling out is working or if we need to change it. But yes, Brown Act questions are big ones for sure. Also in how the input is received on the platform. So we've had some interesting discussions already about that.
So Ashley Stanley with BKF.
My question is also a segue from the Nextdoor experience, which I think is just a good example of getting people engaged and then some of the negatives that can come from it. And an interesting question was raised about if you comment on something on Nextdoor, you can then mute and you can just throw your comment out there and then you can escape from it. And so I wonder if in your platform you'll be trying to address that. And I don't know how popular this would be, but maybe if you comment, then you have to be engaged, like you have to receive all messages afterwards. Because I think that's one of the benefits of showing up to a public meeting, which is increasingly difficult. But you do have to hear it. You don't have to listen, but you have to hear it. I guess you could run in and run out, but on Nextdoor, that's been an interesting subject that's come up, that you can just throw your comment out there and you could close the conversation, or you could throw your comment out there and you can mute it so you don't have to hear anybody else's opinion.
It's such a good example. So I again put that in the category of we'll see. So we will try a few things that we think will work, and we'll see how it's working, and then we'll adjust based on that. But one of the things that we have noticed even at the federal level is the platform is specifically not designed for individuals to interact with each other. That may come later. It's kind of part 3 in our road ahead, but it's primarily for people to provide input to lawmakers or to or on a topic of interest in the area, and it makes it a little bit less a little bit tougher for someone to personally reply to you or to kind of diss your comment, but we'll be figuring it out. We'll be kind of watching to see how it goes. But that's those kinds of experiences we'll be learning from in other contexts. You know, that might work great if you're talking about you know, the grass over here, but maybe not for, you know, other situations. So. We will be experimenting, but it's a really good example.
Let's do just a quick poll, because I think this also can help Marci and other folks in the room. How many of you have a Facebook account? How many of you have a Twitter account? How many of you exist on Nextdoor? How many of you have existed on Nextdoor and then gotten rid of your Nextdoor? How many of you use Instagram?
Well,
how many of you were familiar with POPVOX before today?
oh, thanks, guys.
How many of you are going to go, and how many of you are going to go out and sign up for POPVOX after this?
Thank you, and please wait for January. So we have such a, I was talking with somebody yesterday who was saying, oh my goodness, how many sites like actually have to relaunch every 2 years? But post-election, we are busy relaunching. It's not just with new members, but lots of new functionality. But it really is a wonderful opportunity to go back every 2 years. You get a fresh Congress and a fresh legislature, and you get a fresh POPVOX.
And it's portable. So former Mayor Ron Gonzalez, the mic is coming around.
Good morning. Great stuff. Many of these elected officials have large percentage of the constituencies whose first language is not English. Will your systems be capable in other languages?
I'm so glad you asked that. And actually, to the great credit of the elected officials that we've talked with already in San Mateo County, that's one of the first issues that's been brought up, which has been extremely helpful for us to go back to people we're talking about funding, so that we can make it available in Spanish, and I think a few of the other languages that we've talked about are Mandarin, and even just figuring out what the primary languages are in the various areas. So that will be a priority, and I appreciate you asking it.
Question in the back. And if you could identify yourself. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm David Golden. I'm the many things, but it's relevant. But my question, I'm the chair or the secretary of the West of Twin Peaks Central Council. West of Twin Peaks Central Council is an organization that has a mission very similar to yours, but we're like 50, 60 years old. We're a consortium of local neighborhoods that tries to get together and advocate for our neighborhood interests. And I'm wondering what relationship something like us might have to your virtual relationship. And is there an opportunities there?
Absolutely.
Are there...
Yeah. So part of the platform will be, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but tools for organizations like yours to also communicate with the folks who are a part of your constituency. So I'd love to talk in person about, again, testing out and figuring out what we've got planned and how it would work with the way you work now, and maybe some ideas you've got on a list somewhere that you wish somebody would address.
And the presentations, we will make sure, if it's acceptable to both of the speakers, I like to use that as a caveat, that we will send out the presentations to all of the attendees today, as well as various contact information. So, we have a question. Oh, it's right behind you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Thibodeau. A lot of what goes on at the local level isn't just policy, it's also projects. And there's a lot of room for hyperbole when you start to throw questions out about what do you think of this project or that. How do you see your platform working in that context?
It's a really good question. So our initial 2010 view of putting bills on the platform and allowing people to support or oppose a bill was undertaken for the reason that a lawmaker also has to make a binary choice. So we didn't want to, and again, this is 2010 thinking, we didn't want to, this is at the federal level, put all the bills online and allow constituents to say, well, I like that appropriations bill except for X. So, you know, but you know, the lawmaker actually has to figure out, you know, am I going to vote for it despite X? But in 2018, almost 2019, I think that forcing people into a binary, especially when they're fresh to an issue, gets them polarized early in a way that's not productive, especially at the local level. So in our early, this is kind of the benefit of making lots of tries along the way and learning. So part of the rollout for the local platform will be the ability for a lawmaker or a jurisdiction to have a few options in the way that they present, we're calling it a post, but an issue. So they could request a binary kind of poll-esque input on the issue, if that's helpful to them. They could also pose a question to receive comments on it. We will be defaulting to the lawmaker or the jurisdiction in how they phrase that question. But I think some encouraging guidance would be to allow input first before establishing a binary.
So I would like to thank our speakers today, Marci Harris and Mark Vitner, for joining us. We would like to highlight our upcoming events from the Chamber of Commerce perspective. We have the awards dinner and recognition, the 50th Annual Progress Seminar, as well as our Next Birdies for Business. And from SAMCEDA's perspective, we will be back here at the Oracle Conference Center in March, right now, tentatively March 8th, and then again for our Thread Talks for our 67th annual meeting. I want to thank Wells Fargo as our presenting sponsor. I want to thank Oracle as our venue sponsor, all of our corporate, business, tech, and program sponsors. Most importantly, on behalf of myself and Amy Buckmaster, we want to thank you for being here and joining us this morning. We wish all of you a very happy and healthy holiday season. Thanks.